Kathmandu, Nepal, September 12, 2025. The streets of Nepal's bustling capital, usually alive with the noise of motorcycles, street vendors, and the rhythm of daily life, have fallen into an uneasy silence. Soldiers in camouflage, rifles slung across their shoulders, patrol the empty boulevards of Kathmandu. The air is tense, heavy with uncertainty, as the army enforces a nationwide curfew. This extraordinary step comes after a week of violent unrest that shook the Himalayan nation to its core. Deadly protests erupted across several cities, culminating in the resignation of the Prime Minister and the fiery destruction of Nepal's parliament building. The country, home to nearly 30 million people, now faces what many describe as a political vacuum, and the army has stepped in to restore order. On Friday morning, the scene in the heart of Kathmandu was surreal. Wide shots captured uniformed soldiers marching along the otherwise deserted streets. Checkpoints were set up on major intersections, with troops stopping vehicles, inspecting identification papers, and questioning drivers. At one point, soldiers waved a lone motorcyclist through, a fleeting glimpse of normal movement in a city otherwise brought to a standstill. The government's main administrative hub, Singha Durbar, usually bustling with civil servants and politicians, stood almost eerily quiet. Cameras recorded its sprawling compound, the tall gates, the austere facade, and its silent corridors. Once the symbol of Nepal's fragile democracy, it now appeared as a fortress under military watch. Just a few blocks away, the office of the Attorney General was surrounded by armed guards. Soldiers in heavy boots stood shoulder to shoulder, their expressions grim and unyielding. A barbed wire barricade wound across one of the main avenues, a stark symbol of a capital city under lockdown. The curfew followed days of escalating protests, sparked by accusations of corruption, authoritarianism, and political betrayal. Demonstrators, many of them young students and workers, flooded the streets demanding accountability from the government. The protests turned violent after police opened fire on crowds earlier this week, leaving dozens dead and hundreds injured. By Wednesday night, furious protesters stormed Parliament in Kathmandu. Flames engulfed parts of the building, smoke billowing into the night sky as firefighters struggled to contain the blaze. Hours later, the Prime Minister, already under immense political pressure, announced his resignation. His sudden departure, however, left no clear successor in place. Analysts say the country has entered uncharted territory. With parliament in ruins and no caretaker government formed, the army has assumed a central role in maintaining stability. Yet this intervention has raised uneasy questions about Nepal's fragile democracy, which has only existed in its current form since the end of the monarchy in 2008. In a brief televised address, Nepal's army chief appealed for calm, stressing that the curfew was a temporary measure to restore peace and protect citizens. He urged people to remain indoors and avoid spreading rumours. Though the military has not declared martial law outright, the scope of its authority now extends into almost every aspect of public life. Residents have been warned that anyone violating the curfew risks arrest. Only essential services, hospitals, emergency workers, and select government agencies are being allowed limited movement. Even so, shops, schools, and transport systems remain closed, leaving many citizens anxious about food supplies and access to medicine. International observers expressed concern. Diplomats from neighbouring India and China, both of whom maintain close ties with Nepal, have called for restraint and a swift return to civilian governance. Human rights groups have also voiced fears that the heavy military presence could lead to further abuses. For ordinary Nepalis, the curfew has brought both fear and frustration. Residents describe the atmosphere as stifling, with entire neighbourhoods cut off from one another. Rajesh Shrestha, a shopkeeper in the Tamil district, said his family has been struggling to adjust. "We cannot even step outside to buy basic groceries. The soldiers are everywhere. It feels like the city is not ours anymore," said Shrestha. University student Anita Koirala, who had joined protests earlier in the week, voiced anger at the political collapse. "Our leaders have abandoned us, and now the army rules the streets. This is not democracy. This is a betrayal of everything we fought for," Koirala said. Others, however, support the army's intervention. Taxi driver Ramesh Gurung, whose vehicle now sits idle under the curfew, told reporters the protests were too violent. "People were dying. At least the army brings some order. We need stability first, then politics later," Gurung said. Across the region, Nepal's turmoil has raised alarm. India's Ministry of External Affairs issued a carefully worded statement urging all parties to respect constitutional order and work towards peaceful dialogue. China, meanwhile, expressed hope that Nepal's leaders would restore stability and safeguard national unity. In Washington, the US State Department condemned the violence and called for accountability. A spokesperson said, "The people of Nepal deserve a government that listens to their demands, upholds democratic values and ensures peace." The United Nations added its voice, with the Secretary-General appealing for restraint on both sides. "We urge the Nepali authorities to protect human rights and ensure that security forces exercise maximum restraint in maintaining law and order," the UN statement read. Nepal's path to democracy has been fraught with turmoil. After a decade-long Maoist insurgency ended in 2006, the monarchy was abolished and the country declared a republic 2 years later. Since then, Nepal has struggled with frequent government collapses, corruption scandals and ethnic tensions. The current crisis, however, marks one of the most severe challenges since the democratic transition. The burning of parliament is symbolic not only of political dysfunction, but also of public disillusionment with the ruling elite. Political scientist Dr. Suman Adhikari explained, "This is a turning point for Nepal. If democratic institutions cannot recover quickly, the army may assume a longer role in governance, and that would change the trajectory of this country," Adhikari said. For now, life in Kathmandu remains frozen. Images show wide avenues, once clogged with honking taxis and buzzing motorcycles, lying empty under the midday sun. Stray dogs wander the streets where soldiers now march. Barbed wire coils at intersections, a reminder of the barricades erected overnight. The curfew has paralysed daily commerce. Street vendors who depend on daily earnings have been left without income. Families worry about running out of essentials. Local media reported that small queues formed outside a handful of pharmacies allowed to remain open, with police tightly monitoring the flow of customers. The education system is also at a standstill. Schools and universities are closed indefinitely, disrupting the studies of millions of students. Online learning, a solution during the pandemic, remains inaccessible to many due to poor internet infrastructure. Uncertainty looms over what happens next. Political negotiations to appoint an interim prime minister have stalled, with parties unable to agree on a candidate. Without parliament, many fear the process could drag on, leaving the military with de facto control for weeks or months. The crisis is testing the resilience of Nepal's democratic experiment. While some citizens reluctantly accept the army's role as a stabilising force, others warn of the dangers of military overreach. Former lawmaker Pushpa Basnet issued a warning. The army is not a substitute for elected leadership. If this situation continues, Nepal risks sliding into authoritarian rule, Basnet said. For the moment, Kathmandu's streets remain under the watchful gaze of soldiers. The echo of their boots on pavement has replaced the city's usual sounds. The curfew, though described as temporary, has already altered the rhythm of daily life and perhaps the course of Nepal's political future. The images of soldiers standing guard at Singha Durbar and barbed wire cutting across Kathmandu's roads will likely linger in public memory for years to come. They tell a story of a nation caught between chaos and control, between the promise of democracy and the peril of instability. Nepal's next steps, whether toward reconciliation, reform or deeper crisis, remain uncertain. But for now, the capital is a city under curfew, its fate suspended in the silence of streets once full of life.